Alright, what is up guys, it is Storm back here with another video, and in this one, I'm going to be talking about a manga called 17 Sai that is based off the real life case of Junko Furuta, a girl who was kidnapped, tortured, and tragically lost her life back in the 80s in Japan. Now, I originally made this video but it got demonetized, so I re-recorded and re-edited some parts that were just way too in detail and just absolutely horrible things that happened to her. So I left some of those parts out, especially the in detail parts. But first, let's just go over the case and what exactly happened before we get into the manga. And if you want to know everything just in detail about what happened about the case, just go look up the wiki. It's mainly what I used, and I definitely left some parts out, but all that out of the way, why don't we just dive right on in. Junko Furuta was born in Misato in the Saitama prefecture of Tokyo. She lived with her parents, her older brother, and her younger brother. As a teenager, she attended Yashiho Minami High School and worked part-time at a plastic molding factory during after-school hours since October 1988. She did this to save up money for a graduation trip she had planned. She also accepted a job at an electronics retailer where she planned on working after graduation. At high school, she was well liked by her classmates with high grades and very infrequent absences. She was a popular girl with pretty features and dreams of being an idol singer. The night she was abducted, Furuta had been looking forward to going home to watch the final episode of the TV show Dragonfly. The perpetrators were four teenage boys: Miyano Hiroshi, who was 18, Ogura Joe, who was 17, Minato Shinji, who was 16, and Watanabe Yasushi, who was also 17. Who were respectively referred to as A, B, C, and D in court documents. At the time of the crime, they used the second floor of Minato's house as a hangout, and had previously engaged in crimes including purse snatching, extortion, and even sexual assault. Miyano, the leader of the crime, had a history of problematic behavior since elementary school, such as shoplifting and damaging school property. In April 1986, he enrolled in a private high school in Tokyo, though he dropped out the following year. After this, he continued to commit several crimes that escalated over time. At the time of the crime, he had been living with his girlfriend, the older sister of boy D, Watanabe Yasushi, and was working as a tile worker to save up money to marry her. Unsatisfied with the job's low pay, Miyano became involved with the gangster and frequently committed sex crimes. This made his girlfriend lose interest in him, and the relationship broke up. On November 25th, 1988, Miyano and Minato wandered around Misato with the intention of robbing and doing you-know-what to local women. At 8:30 p.m., they spotted Furuta riding her bike home after she had finished a shift at her job. Under Miyano's orders, Minato kicked Furuta off the bike and fled the scene. Miyano, under the pretense of witnessing the attack by coincidence, approached Furuta and offered to walk her home safely. Furuta accepted this offer, unaware that Miyano was leading her to a nearby warehouse, where he lied about having Yakuza connections. He did you-know-what to her in the warehouse, and again in a nearby hotel, threatening to kill her. From the hotel, Miyano called Minato and his other friends, Ogura and Watanabe, and bragged to them about what he had done. They were in captivity in order to allow numerous people to continue the horrific events. The group had a history of doing this as a gang, and had recently kidnapped and done this to another girl whom they released afterward. Around 3 a.m., Miyano took Furuta to a nearby park where Minato, Ogura, and Watanabe were waiting. They had learned her home address from a notebook in her backpack, and told her that they knew where she lived, and that Yakuza members would come and harm her family if she attempted to escape. The four boys overpowered her, took her to a house in the Ayase district of Adachi, and did you-know-what to her as a gang. The house, which was owned by Minato's parents, soon became their regular gang hideout. On November 27th, Furuta's parents contacted the police about her disappearance. To discourage further investigation, the kidnappers forced her to call her mother 3 times to convince her that she had run away, but was safe and staying with some friends. They also forced Furuta to stop the police investigation. When Minato's parents were present, Furuta was forced to act as his girlfriend. Dropped this pretense when it became clear that Minato's parents would not report them to the police. The Minato stated that they did not intervene because they were afraid of Miyano, and because their son was increasingly violent towards them. On the night of November 28th, Minato invited 2 other boys, Tetsuo Nakamura and Koichi Ihara, E and F respectively, over to the Minato's house. They went to the upstairs room where Junko was sitting, wearing a long-sleeved t-shirt and a skirt that Mino had stolen from a clothing store a few days prior. They drank cough medicine, pretending it was illegal substances, and acted high. Furuta tried to run away, screaming in fear. Mino grabbed her legs and Ihara put a pillow over her face. The parents were awakened and went to check on the scream, to which Minato told them that it was nothing. The group then decided to do you-know-what to Furuta as a gang. During this time, she was in a state of unconsciousness, staring at the ceiling without blinking. The group held Furuta captive in the Minato residence for over 40 days, where they repeatedly did horrific things to her. They also invited men and teenage boys home and encouraged them to take turns doing you-know-what to her. Overall, that happened to her more than 500 times by over 100 men and teenage boys. On occasion, this happened by 12 men in one day. Now this part right here that I'm reading is absolutely horrible, and I'm afraid that I can't go into it just because it's just too severe on how just horrible it is, and I do not want to get demonetized, and I just don't want this video to be fucked over by YouTube. They just tortured her in a horrific number of ways, is what happened. And this ultimately resulted in her drastic appearance change from the brutality of the attacks. Her face was so swollen that it was difficult to make out her features. Her body was also severely crippled, giving off a rotting smell that caused the boys to lose interest in her. And as a result, the boys kidnapped and did the same thing to a 19-year-old woman, who, like Furuta, was on her way home from work. On January 4th, 1989, after losing a game of mahjong against another person the night before, Mino decided to take his anger out on Furuta by pouring lighter fluid on her body and setting her on fire. Furuta allegedly made attempts to put out the fire, but gradually became unresponsive. They continued to do inexplicable and absolutely horrific things to her until she eventually succumbed to her wounds and died. Now, less than 24 hours after her death, Minato's brother called to tell him that Furuta appeared to be dead, afraid of being penalized for what they had done. They decided to get rid of her by putting her remains in a drum and filled it with wet concrete. Around 8 p.m. they loaded it and disposed of the drum. During her captivity, Furuta had mentioned to her captors several times that she had regretted not being able to see the final episode of Dragonfly. Miyano found the videotape and placed it where they put her. As he later explained, it was not because he pitied Furuta, but because he did not want her to return as a ghost and haunt him. On January 23, 1989, Miyano and Ogura were arrested for what they did to the 19-year-old girl whom they had kidnapped in December. On March 29th, 2 police officers came to interrogate them, as women's clothing had been found at their addresses. During their interrogation, Miyano believed that one of the officers was aware of his culpability in what he had done to Furuta. Thinking that Ogura had confessed to the crimes against her, Miyano told the police where to find Furuta. The police were initially puzzled as they had been referring to the murder of a different woman and her 7-year-old son that had occurred 9 days prior to Furuta's abduction, a case which remains unsolved. The police found the drum containing Furuta the following day. She was identified via fingerprints. On April 1st, 1989, Ogura was arrested for a separate incident, and subsequently rearrested for Furuta's murder. The arrest of Watanabe, Minato, and Minato's brother followed. Several other accomplices who participated in Furuta's abuse were officially identified, including Tetsuo Nakamura and Koichi Ihara, who were charged after their DNA was found on the victim. The identities of the boys were sealed by the courts as they were juveniles at the time of the crime. However, journalists had discovered their identities and published them. They stated that given the severity of the crime, the accused did not deserve to have their right to anonymity upheld. All 4 boys pled guilty to committing bodily injury that resulted in death, rather than murder. In July 1990, a lower court sentenced Miyano, the leader of the crime, to 17 years in prison. He appealed his sentence, but the Tokyo High Court judge at the time sentenced him to an additional 3 years in prison. The 20-year sentence was the second longest sentence given to Japan before life imprisonment. And as mentioned before, he was 18 at the time of the murder. Mino's mother reportedly paid 50 million yen, or about 425,000 US dollars in compensation ordered by the civil court after selling their family home. Mino was denied parole in 2004, and he was released from prison in 2009. In January 2013, Mino was rearrested for fraud. Due to insufficient evidence, he was released without charge later that month. Minato, who originally received a 4 to 6 year sentence, was resentenced to 5 to 9 years by the same judge upon appeal, and as mentioned before, he was 16 at the time of the murder. Minato's parents and brother were not charged. Furuta's parents were dismayed by the sentences received by their daughter's killers, and won a civil suit against the parents of Minato, in whose home the crimes were committed. After his release, Minato moved in with his mother. However, in 2018, Minato was rearrested again for attempted murder after beating a 32-year-old man with a metal rod and slashing his throat with a knife. Watanabe, who was originally sentenced to 3 to 4 years in prison, received an upgraded sentence to 5 to 7 years, and as mentioned before, he was 17 at the time of the murder. For his role in the crime, Ogura served 8 years in a juvenile prison before he was released in August 1999. He was 17 at the time of the murder, as mentioned before. After his release, he took the family name Kamisaku when he was adopted by a supporter of his. He is said to have boasted about his role in the kidnapping, sexual assault, and torture of Furuta. In July 2004, he was arrested for assaulting Takotoshi Isano, an acquaintance he thought his girlfriend may have been involved with. Ogura tracked Isano down, beat him, and shoved him into his truck. He then drove Isano from Adachi to his mother's bar in Misato, where he allegedly beat Isano for 4 hours. During that time, Ogura repeatedly threatened to kill the man, telling him that he had killed before and knew how to get away with it. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison for assaulting Isano and has since been released. Ogura's mother allegedly vandalized Furuta's grave, stating that she had ruined her son's life. It has also been reported that Ogura had depleted his father's savings, money which was intended to be provided as restitution to Furuta's family, using it to buy and consume a number of luxury goods. Many believe that the sentences were too light for the severity of the crimes committed. Junko Furuta's funeral was held on April 2, 1989. One of her friend's memorial addresses stated that, "Jun-chan, welcome back. I never imagined that we would see you again this way. You must have been in so much pain, so much suffering. The happy we all made for the school festival looked really good on you. We will never forget you. I've heard the principal has presented you with a graduation certificate, so we graduated together, all of us. Jun-chan, there's no more pain, no more suffering. Please rest in peace." Furuta's intended future employer presented her parents with a uniform she would have worn in the position she had accepted. The uniform was placed in her casket. At her graduation, Furuta's school principal presented her a high school diploma, which was given to her parents. The location near where Furuta's body was discovered has been developed since and is now Wakasu Park. At the time, Japanese people were concerned about a US-influenced epidemic of violent crime which they called the American Disease. And this case ultimately resulted in 3 books having been written about the crime, a couple movies, and, as mentioned before, the manga called 17 Sai. Now that was the horrific case of Junko Furuta. But why don't we just dive right on into the manga 17 Sai, which is based off this case. Now, the story actually is from the perspective of one of the perpetrators named Hiroki, not from the perspective of Junko, which caught me off guard as I expected it to be from her perspective, but it's not what you would expect, I guess. But the story, I don't know how to feel about it. For one, they changed the name of Junko to Sachiko. And in this story, she has a twin sister. As the story goes on, it tries to get you to feel bad for the main character of Hiroki, as it makes him seem like he feels bad about what he's doing, but he can't do anything because he's scared of the leader of the group that he's in, Miyamoto. But at so many different points in the manga, he could have helped her, but he just chose not to. So the story sticks to the same premise of them kidnapping her and keeping her locked up in one of their friends' houses. And all the while they're sexually assaulting her between the 4 of them, except for Hiroki. He just says that he did it. He just doesn't feel like doing it as he feels guilty for kidnapping her. But they invite a lot of other dudes to come and sexually assault her. Now the manga doesn't shy away from being graphic. It shows a lot of what actually happened to Junko Furuta through the character of Sachiko, whether it be the sexual assault, the torture, or just all the other heinous things that they did to her. As the story goes on, the police get involved and begin to search for her, and her sister also searches for her, and her and Hiroki have this dynamic in the story where her sister Miki knows that Hiroki knows something, but all the while Hiroki, every time he sees Sachiko's sister Miki, who's looking for her, just feels guilty as they almost completely look alike. And they try to set up this connection between the two sisters that Miki is feeling what is actually happening to her sister and is just trying to find her at all costs since they're twins. And as the story goes on, worse and worse things happen to the characters, especially Sachiko, along with Hiroki as he's forced to partake in the murder of his friend. All the while, the character of Miyamoto, who is the perpetrator behind all of this, is portrayed as this guy who scares everyone shitless, and that everyone is just scared of and wants nothing to do with, and that they're all doing this just because of him. Well, that's the way that Hiroki puts it anyway. But eventually the police catch on by using one of the boys who sexually assaulted her, and they end up arresting everyone involved, including Miyamoto and Hiroki, and Miki finds out that Hiroki knew everything that was going on and that he could have saved her sister at any point, but he just chose not to. But the way this manga ends, I just don't know how to feel about it. You would think that Sachiko would end up being murdered, but that is actually not the case. She actually ends up surviving, as well as Hiroki trying to get Miki to forgive him for what he had done. But at the time of me recording this, I still don't know what to think of the ending. I don't know if I hate it, or I just can't stand it, or that it just doesn't sit right with me. I think I can firmly say that I don't like this manga, but I don't hate it. It's just, I feel like it might have been a quick cash grab by the author of this manga, but at the same time, they might have been trying to show the severity of what had happened to Junko Furuta through this manga and through this story. But one thing that I can definitely say is that while reading this manga, it definitely fucked with me. This is probably one of the darkest manga that I have ever read. And knowing that this was based off a true story and that this type of stuff actually happened to the real life girl of Junko Furuta is something horrific to think about. And it has me thinking about the motherfuckers who are responsible for this, that they definitely did not get the prison sentences that they should have gotten. They all should have gotten life. Especially the 4 main pricks that were involved. But overall, I just wanted to talk about this manga and talk about this case because it just made me think about this innocent girl and everyone that was connected to her and just this horrible thing that just happened. But anyways, I think I'm just rambling at this point. But if you guys like this video, be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know if you want to see more videos like this, where I look at darker manga or just cases like this that happened in Japan that might have spawned a manga, anime, or are just connected to an anime or a manga, or are just connected to Japan in general, or just a true crime sort of video like this in general. Just let me know down in the comments below. But with that, I will see you all in the next video. Peace. 愛してる